Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. I am joined this afternoon by Dan Billing, who is going to be talking to you about enabling a security testing mindset, a guide for leaders, coaches, and managers. And if you have any questions for Dan about his webinar, you can type them into the questions field there on your control panel. And then at the very end of the webinar, we will get through as many of your questions as we can, one by one. So please type your questions at any point. You don't necessarily have to wait till the very end. So now that's enough from me. I will now hand you over to today's presenter, Dan Billing. Hello, Dan.
Hi there, Dara. How are you?
Great, great.
Good stuff. Oh, hang on. Let me just. My cursor's gone missing. Okay. Share my screen. Can you see my slides, Dara?
I'm still seeing the holding slide here. I think we need to open a different window.
How about now?
Now, perfect.
Great stuff. There's a little button there. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Dan Billing. As Dara introduced, I'm 16 years in testing, and I'm currently a senior test architect at Medidata in the UK. Medidata are a medical sciences and clinical trials software services company, and we produce software for our clients, who are usually pharmaceutical companies and research organisations in the pharmaceutical sector. I'm also a weekend testing Europe facilitator, where I work on that with Neil Studd and Amy Phillips. And I've been speaking for a few years now in the software testing conference circuit, most recently at Eurostar 2016 in Sweden, and recently Nordic Testing Days, Romania Testing Conference, and many others. If anyone wants to get hold of me, then my Twitter handle is the Test Doctor, and my blog is thetestdoctor.wordpress.com. So that's enough about me. We're going to talk about the security testing mindset. So it's fairly clear from the research that's been done via a number of different organizations, but most recently that this piece of research by Trustwave and Osterman Research. Now Trustwave are quite a large security testing consultancy, so they may have a bit of an axe to grind here, but in order to generate business. But a lot of what they say is true. 1 in 5 businesses do no security testing or do very minimal security testing, and it's often the software issue that we don't discuss in businesses and teams. It's often considered something that's nice to have, or something you do at the end of a project, or something that we don't necessarily need to worry about. And that often creates a problem for software companies or companies that produce software for their clients, in that it leaves a lot of technical debt in terms of security flaws and vulnerabilities that need to be fixed. And it also leaves you vulnerable to potential attack. Where security policies exist, they're usually reactive rather than proactive in nature. So that means that they will generally do some security work after a breach has been discovered, or while they think they might be vulnerable, rather than doing the work up front before a breach actually takes place. So think about the balance of whether your businesses are reactive or proactive in their approach to security. And then quite often it's considered that security testing skills are seen as highly specialized and expensive to utilize. So that means that it's difficult to hire people with the right skills, and it's also, once you've got them in place, they're expensive to hire. Normally they're either contractors who are on a very high daily rate, or these people also might work for a consultancy who charge large fees in order to bring them in and utilize their expertise. What I've been trying to do the last few years is trying to include security testing skills in my day-to-day testing, and in the last few years been focusing solely on security testing. So I've been trying to enable the security testing mindset not only in myself, but also the people that I work with. And where also I've been encouraged by the managers, test managers, engineering managers, even up to the Chief Technology Officer level of management, encouraged by them to do good security testing early as part of our day-to-day work rather than leaving it to the last minute and it being something that's added on or nice to have. So what is the security testing mindset? Well, it's about promoting awareness of software security within businesses and teams. And what I might mean by that is ensuring that the people that you work with, the testers and developers, product managers, scrum masters, whoever it might be, that they're aware of what security is, what the issues are around security, how it affects you as a business, what the potential risks and threats are. Then from that, promoting awareness, from a technical point of view as well as a business point of view, you really need to develop a deep understanding of the risks and threats to your application. Not only to you as a business, but to your customers and the people who use your software. And that could include people that want to do you harm, such as hackers and other types of criminals, for example. It's also about identifying and investing in individual talents and interests that meet your team's needs, the skills that people have and the interests that people have, and how you can emphasize those and grow them so that they meet the needs of your teams. And once you've found those people or those individuals, or maybe you've hired new people in, it's then enabling them to develop those skills within your organization so that you can then take that learning and spread it around the team and share that knowledge so it reduces the impact of having what some people like to call a bus factor, meaning that there's only a single person in the organization that knows and understands this stuff, and that if something happens to them, either get ill or unfortunately they might get injured or killed, then they're not a bus factor, i.e. they've not been hit by the bus and then you've lost that knowledge completely. And then once you have that knowledge and that skill in your organization, it's then supporting that as a leader, supporting that mindset in your teams so that they know that security should be one of the priorities that you have in your teams, and that is one of the things you do rather than something that's sort of cast aside, and that is something that's deep inside, entrenched in your value system in your teams. So we're going to look at each of these things one by one. We're going to focus in on them deep, and then we'll come out and look at the summarize of these at the end of the session, and then hopefully you'll have some questions about this at the end of the session. So, promoting awareness. Think about who's responsible for security in your business. Is it your CTO, Chief Technology Officer, Chief Security Officer, or do you have a CISO, Chief Information Security Officer? These are often called different things in different businesses, and that will vary from place to place, depending on the size and complexity of your organization. So it's important to find out who in your business is responsible for security. Find out who they are, get to know them if possible. If it's a small enough organization, maybe you work with them directly, maybe you report to them already. If it's a very large organization, there's perhaps a very lengthy chain of responsibility before you get up to that person. But it's important to understand who's responsible in the business. And if you can't get to know them, find out who they report to so that you can get that knowledge and try and get that emphasis and find out who's responsible. That way you can find out whose ownership of this problem might be, and then start generating that interest by liaising and working with those people who have the influence and the knowledge of the business. Does anyone else already do security testing in your business? If it's a particularly large organization, you might already have a team that already does it. If there is such a team, why not find out who they are and introduce them into your organization, into your teams, so they become a bit more integrated with your day-to-day development work. Secondly, does your business have a security policy? What does it include? Is it up to date? Is it relevant? Familiarize yourself with it. What are the rules and regulations around your business? For example, if you work in a heavily regulated organization like I do, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, Then you're going to have things like regulations around drugs, regulations around medical devices. If you work in a banking organisation or an organisation that handles payments and transactions, you're going to be subject to the various laws and regulations around data security in that space as well. It's worth considering how those things impact your security policy and therefore how it impacts your security testing processes and practices. And then make sure others in your team are familiar with that policy. Live it. If it's part of your development life cycle, ensure that it's adhered to rather than ignored. Once we've got that, and you've established that someone owns the process, you can then start broadening your sources of data, your sources of information. Now I mentioned OWASP here, that's the Open Source Web Application Security Project. They've been one of the organisations that I've gone to for a lot of my learning in the past. They have a lot of information available on their website, and it's very rich, very deep. A lot of it's quite complicated, but you can break it down to make it simple and make it fit for your organizations. They also have regular meetups in most of the major cities and development and tech industry centers in the world. I myself attend the Bristol OWASP chapter meeting occasionally, and now that I work in London, I'll probably be attending the London chapter from 2017. It's all a question about developing that knowledge, gaining experiences from other people who work in the security space, and then bringing that into your organizations. It's worth following also security researchers and bloggers. I've mentioned Troy Hunt here. He's the guy on the photo at the bottom of the screen. He's an Australian guy, and he tweets and blogs regularly about security matters. But there are lots of other people out there who do the same. I mentioned Troy because he's been very influential in my learning. He has a lot of online courses that are very helpful, and he's built his own vulnerable web application to help me learn. And it's available, it's out there on the web, and you can use it to try out your security testing skills. And then there are things like Computer File. They're an organization that handle learning and knowledge in the computer space, and they have a YouTube channel. And they have a great sort of set of 10-minute videos that explain the basics of a lot of the major vulnerabilities and threats to businesses and applications these days. For example, they do a really great one on injection flaws and cross-site scripting and password security and things like that. They're really worth a watch and sharing with your teams so that they become more and more aware of the types of issues that you're having to deal with. You can utilize and share their learning materials, in-house learning, the YouTube videos, the vulnerable website that I mentioned, Hack Yourself First. A lot of this information is in the handout, the notes that goes with this webinar, which I believe is available from the link in the control panel. And Dara will probably be able to share that at the end of the webinar. Also, if you have internal communications at hand, for example, HipChat or Slack, which are quite popular these days, I've used those. I've also used Chatter inside Salesforce before, and you can use that to disseminate knowledge and information about the latest vulnerabilities that have been discovered, or security matters that relate to your business, or ensuring that people are adhering to clear desk policies, or even down to code sharing between developers in remote locations to ensure that people are peer reviewing their code, or test pairing and things like that. Those kinds of channels are very important for promoting awareness of different issues. So, understanding the risks and threats, and this goes quite deep into getting a handle on what the risks and threats are to your business. So let's go through this. Firstly, there are the vulnerabilities, the flaws and weaknesses in your applications. Now these might be software flaws, or they might be human vulnerabilities. For example, people who are vulnerable to scams, phishing, or things like cold calling, or people coming up to trying to infiltrate your office, posing as like a cleaner or a delivery person, that kind of thing. So these can be both human flaws and software flaws. Then you've got the people who are trying to actually perform these attacks, and these could be individuals such as hackers working on their own. They could be part of an organization, such as another company who wants to steal data from you and proprietary information, or it could be governments or other organizations that want to spy or steal proprietary information or business information from one country to another, or all sorts of things like that. And then you've got to think about the motivation around these things. So who wants to attack you, but also why they want to attack you. So think about their motivations. Are they financial? Is it financial data they want to steal? Or if they steal the data, can they then sell that data on? Because data is essentially a commodity. Are they doing it for political reasons? So if you work for, say, a government-affiliated organization, will someone want to attack you because of that reason? Or are they doing it just for notoriety, to make themselves famous? And some hackers will do that. They do it because they want to get noticed. And from that you can devise what the threats are to your business and where the threats are and where they come from. Next, you might want to think about the infrastructure of your organization and your software and understand how the infrastructure exposes risks and threats. So when you come to do something called threat modeling, and I use this technique quite often to find out what those risks and threats are to the business, I go through the infrastructure and try and devise what those risks and threats are. So you might want to think about whether your system is hosted in the cloud. For example, is it remotely hosted by an organization such as Amazon or Google or some other organization, or is it locally hosted? Are you hosting that in local servers or in data centers which are remote to your, or not necessarily in your offices? Then you've got to think about the layers of infrastructure underneath that. You've got to think about the databases and how secure they are. Can they be easily hacked? Is the data encrypted? The web servers, are they open to the internet? Are the ports that those web servers sat on, are they open to the world? And what the infrastructure of those web servers are they configured securely? Are you exposing information to the real world about how those web servers are configured? And the same goes for the databases. Services such as messaging, REST services and things like that. What are the interactions between the components of your systems? Are there any vulnerabilities in the way the data moves around the system? And then the interfaces such as the user interfaces. We also have, I've mentioned APIs and REST services, but the user interface is where most of the attacks will take place, because that's generally where they're the most weakest, because people, no matter how secure the back end is, if the user interface is flawed, then that's going to allow a lot of data to escape out of the system. Likewise, if your user interface is very secure, but the back end is not, then that can also create a lot of different problems. And then we need to consider things like performance and load balancing. Now, I'm thinking about this from a security point of view, but if the application isn't performant and lots of attacks are flooding the system with denial of service attacks, it can take the application out. So this means that performance and load testing and security testing are inherently tied together because of the nature of the work that we do. One, we need to make sure our application is performant, but we also need to make sure that our application is secure. And the people that do that kind of testing need to work closely together. And then you might have systems called firewalls in between that, which protect all your infrastructure from attack, hopefully giving you a lot of information about where the attacks are coming from. And then you might have a layer of logging or monitoring. So logging and monitoring are very helpful because it gives you early clues about where attacks are coming from, who's doing the attacks, what types of attacks they're doing, who's using your systems, how they're using your systems. And that gives you a lot of information about potential risks and threats to the business. Then we need to think about things like reputation, financial risks, and physical risks. So let's look at it from this point of view. Reputation. If you're hacked and you lose money or you lose data, then people aren't going to trust you. If you lose people's money, then they're not necessarily going to come back to use your services again, or the risks and threats to your business are you make yourself a target if you host a lot of financial information or information that's of value to the people that are trying to attack you. So data is a commodity, as I mentioned earlier. Also, if your systems are being attacked and they're safety critical systems, that could at least put people at risk. So for example, if you're working for let's say a military contractor or a company that makes software for trains or aeroplanes, and that software was hacked, it could put lots and lots of people at risk because those vehicles or those weapon systems that are attacked can then lead to people being harmed. So there's a lot of different ways in which risks and threats can manifest themselves and put the business at risk. So there's one other thing I like to do, and that is to include the analysis for risk and threats within our definitions of done. So when we're doing our testing and planning our work, when we're planning our development, we need to think about the risks and threats as we're doing that, rather than it being the last minute thing. So you want to think about authorization. So who can get access to your system? Authentication, how that authorization takes place, and who the people are. Are the people that are using the system who they say they are? The various components of your system. Mentioned earlier, we were talking about the web servers, the databases, the services, and the interactions and interfaces. User behavior, who's using your system, how are they using it? Data sharing, so how data is exposed to users. Is it presented in the user interface, or is there APIs? How is that data exposed? Are you exposing data that you shouldn't be exposing? How does the data flow through the system? Is it through web services? Is it through files? You need to think about how that happens, and how that data is then stored, and how that data is retained, and also how that data moves around the system. And also user input. One of the things you mustn't do is trust the input that's coming from the users, because you don't know who that user is. It could be a legitimate user, so someone that's logged in and using the system appropriately, or it could be a hacker who's trying to gain access to your systems and steal your data. So don't trust your user input. And remember that when you're building new systems and forms and applications. The next thing we need to think about is hiring or developing the right people in your teams and your organizations. So think about the capabilities that you need to have in your teams, the current capabilities and the future capabilities that you're going to have, or the ones that you need. What are your needs at a business or project level? So what do you need to have the skills in your teams in order to complete your business objectives? And what resources do you have available? And that can be people, it can be processes, or it could be tools. So people in terms of the availability, the number of people you have with the skills that you need, or individuals that have specific skill sets might come in and out on an as-needed basis. Do your processes support that? So do your processes and organisation allow people to flex in and out of projects? Do you have the bandwidth to support that, or do you have a tester who's like a kind of jack of all trades and does a bit of everything? And what tools do you allow them to have? So there are a lot of powerful security tools out there, and it's a question of thinking about which tools are appropriate for your business and how you need to, what testing you need to conduct. Then we need to think about the talents and individual skills of those people. So not everybody is interested in security. So it's important to identify those people that are interested in it and maybe developing those people. Testing is very diverse, and there are a lot of other skills to learn. Some people are more interested in performance, some in automation, some might prefer exploratory testing techniques, but there's no harm in getting people to start incorporating security testing in their day-to-day work, rather than making it a specialist area. Is there anyone in your team that's showing an aptitude or an interest in security? If someone's putting their hand up to wanting to learn these skills, then why not identify that person, offer that person some training? or if you haven't got funds available, then point them towards some of the free learning that's out there. It's quite extensive and really easy to start learning it and getting it on board once you've got a handle on it. Recognize the interests of those you work with. So like who's showing an aptitude and interest, it's important that you see the interests of the people that you work with and incorporate those interests into your teams. If someone's showing a particular interest in security, why not develop that talent? You could run some security exercises in-house, either with a vulnerable application that you've brought in, or one of your own applications. So you could run a capture the flag exercise in your teams. So who finds, security flaws, and you could do it in that way. And then, do you have the current skills to meet your needs? So once if you don't have any of those kinds of people in your teams, do you then need to hire those people in? So sometimes you just need to recruit new staff, and that's really difficult. Identifying good and permanent or contract staff is hard, especially in such a specialized industry in security. Qualified, in inverted commas, security testers are expensive to recruit and are quite rare. Some of this training does cost a lot of money, or you can find people that have got a talent already or an interest and grow them in-house. Support some people like to call the T-shaped tester. So someone with a broad set of general test skills and then one or two deep specialist skills. So someone, for example, who's got a deep interest in performance testing might also be well suited to doing security testing. Or if you've got someone that's got a deep interest in, say, for example, exploratory testing, you could then add security testing skills into that deeper set of skills. If you look at this article from the socialtester.co.uk, that's Rob Lambert's old blog, he's got a great article about T-shaped testers and their role in teams. So what he means by that is, ensuring that you hire in people who have a good base of skills, but you might have one or two or some of those people interested in different types of skill sets that enhance the depth and breadth of the skills in your team. It's worth checking out. It's a really good article. So once we've done that, you've got the right people in your teams, or if you're establishing a team with security testing knowledge, it's important to be able to enable those skills and knowledge development. So allowing training and coaching time in security testing into your teams, allowing people to have the time to breathe and the time to get these skills into their hearts, really, into their day-to-day thinking as a tester. Some of these skills are quite challenging, but it's worth investing in them, not only for them as individuals, because it makes them more valuable to you as a team member, but if they ever decide to move on from your organization, God forbid, that they also have something to add to their personal skill set, which makes them a more employable person going forward. But ultimately, it makes them more valuable to you as a business and as a test manager or a test coach. Utilize vulnerable training websites. This is somewhere that testers can learn without causing harm. There are a lot of great vulnerable training websites out there. I've mentioned Hack Yourself First already, and we'll talk about another one in a minute. Invest in training, classes or online courses. So I've mentioned a couple here, CREST, which is a security training organisation in the UK. And there's one here called Offensive Security. They do a course called the Offensive Security Certified Professional. And those are both very challenging courses. Now, bearing in mind that they're quite expensive, but it does mean that you have a recognised qualification in security testing. It just depends on what value you see in those courses and whether you think they're valuable to your business. But there's a lot of free training out there as well. It just depends on how deep you want to go and how much time and money you want to invest in that process. And it's going to vary from business to business. Once you've got that skill development set up, you might want to create isolated environments of your own applications where testers can learn and practice with a business context. So creating environments that are isolated from your other test environments and development environments, where testers can go and do security testing with permission, where they're enabled to do that and they won't get in trouble for breaking things. So it's important that you give them a safe space where they can do that so that they can actually generate these skills within your own business context. So they're actually doing things that add value, but also they don't do harm to other environments. So it might be that you need to, when you do that and you tell people to go off and do security testing, that they're given permission in writing so that if something does happen and environments come down, that they're not then getting in trouble for doing their job. It's important to recognise that that this can be quite dangerous if done inappropriately, and that you have to have appropriate checks and balances in place to ensure that these environments are maintained and controlled. Here are a couple of places where you can go and learn security testing safely. First is Hack Yourself First. It's by Troy Hunt, the Australian blogger I mentioned earlier, and it's essentially a list of supercars like Ferraris and Aston Martins and things like that, and it's got a lot of vulnerabilities in it. It's got login issues and things like stealing user sessions, SQL injection, cross-site scripting. It's also got an API behind it as well, which is interesting to go and look at information disclosure and things like that. So it's a really good place to go and start learning. It's quite often cleared down, so any hacks that are done on it by trainees are then removed every so often by Troy. So it's worth keeping an eye on that and using it for training in your businesses. I've also got one myself. It's called Ticket Magpie, so this is a little plug for that. It's on GitHub, and I've produced it alongside a chap called David Hertanian, and it's essentially where you can buy concert tickets, and it has, again, login flaws, SQL injection, and a number of other different vulnerabilities, and it's available on GitHub, and you can go and download that and run it in Docker or set it up using Maven on your local machine, and you can run it in there, and you can do no harm to anyone and just go and learn how to do these skills in a safe place. Then you might want to provision environments in things like Docker. Containers and things like Docker are very helpful in creating safe spaces to do security testing in, because it's isolated from your other environments. Or you could use virtual machines, VirtualBox and other virtualization tools, which allow you to again do security testing in isolated places without causing harm to others. And lastly, you might want to think about the tools that enable you to do that. So one of the ones that I use is Z-Attack Proxy. It's another OWASP tool. You can download it. It's open source. It doesn't cost anything to install. It just takes time to learn. So you need to it requires time and practice to become familiar with these tools and use them appropriately, but it has a safe mode in it, so you can test out the functionality without causing any harm to anything. It's worth trying out, and it's very powerful, and you can integrate it with a lot of other tools. Jenkins, for example, for automated testing and continuous integration, and also Python and Ruby and Selenium for automated testing. And then you also need to allow your testers to practice their techniques. So that requires dedication and deep learning to utilize them effectively. So the reason why I mention this is because if you're going to go in half-cocked and try these things out without understanding what you're doing, you could cause some serious harm. So not going and testing sympathetically is important. So just because you can drop a database table doesn't mean you should drop a database table. You can easily try something like updating a table, which proves that it's runnable to SQL injection, rather than dropping a table completely, which could cause harm. Another reason why you should use an isolated environment. And the lastly is supporting security testing in your organization. So I've been lucky in that I've worked with these two guys on the right, Ashley Unit and Rob Lambert at New Voice Media. I'm no longer working at New Voice Media. Ashley is the CTO at New Voice Media, and Rob was the engineering and test manager, and now he's in HR. But they lead by example. They help by leading activities and learning in the organization. They model those practices and enable us as testers to be able to go away and learn these things in our time and bring them into the team. So they supported the testers with enthusiasm and commitment and sharing the values of the business, and that meant ensuring that we had secure applications, or working towards secure applications, and that the testing was valued and that it was shared among the business, and that things like show and tells and hackathons are quite helpful in doing that. And they also champion security matters across the business. So we had regular security updates, and they allowed us to have security training in the organisation, which then helped to spread this knowledge around the team. So just summarising before we go to the questions, remember, promoting awareness of software security issues within businesses and teams, developing an understanding of risks and threats to your application. Thirdly, identifying and investing in individual talents and interests that meet your team's needs. Enabling security testing skills and knowledge development. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, is as a manager, as a leader, as a coach, supporting security testing in your organization. Without that support, quite often these things will go by the wayside and these skills won't be consolidated and shared around the teams. But if as a leader you're allowing people to learn, you're giving them a safe place to learn, and you're giving them a safe place to actually add value to your applications and your businesses, then hopefully we can all develop the security mindset. So my name's Dan Billing. You can find me at The Test Doctor, and thanks very much. Dara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, for that webinar. I'm just going to run through one or two slides here just before we get to the Q&A session. So first off, I'd like to just bring to your attention that the call for submissions to speak at the upcoming Eurostar Conference 2017 are now open, and you can submit to speak up until the deadline, which is 5th of February. And there's some details there on that link. We also have a brand new conference that we're running next year, which is also in February, and this is called UK Star. It'll take place on the 27th and 28th in London, and up until the end of 2016 you can get a 16% discount when you buy 2 tickets to the conference. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about the various keynotes and track sessions and the conversation tracks and workshops that's taking place, you can head over to the UK Star website. So there's a link there that'll bring you through to that particular discount. And if you see in the control panel, there's 1 or 2 handouts. So the first one is some links to those 2 conferences I was referring to. And the other handout there contains support notes from Dan here regarding his webinar. So you can check that out, and you'll have all the information you need, all the different resources Dan was talking about throughout the course of his webinar. So finally, let's have a look at some of your questions. Okay, Dan, the first question that I see here says, awareness is good, but often I find that everyone thinks it's a good idea, but no one wants to invest in the effort. Do you have any recommendations on how to actually get the initiative started or implemented?
Okay, so I was lucky enough that I came into a business that already had wanted to invest in this. But if you're an organisation that isn't currently investing or doesn't see the value in investing that, I would perhaps, if you're able to, and if you're a tester already, and if you found security flaws, one of the key ways you could do this is being a really good bug advocate for your security testing. So if you found a security flaw, an information disclosure issue, or you can say, for example, if you found a flaw where you can modify a URL which then exposes data that you shouldn't be able to get to, then create a video of that issue, share it with the business, communicate with the people that matter. mentioned earlier in the slides is finding out who's responsible for security in the business. Now, if it's someone very, very, very senior, then it may be that you're not able to speak to them, and there's several layers of management between you and the business. But if security is such a big problem for businesses these days, and if you're in the kind of organization that really doesn't communicate these kinds of things, then just communicate it within your team initially. Share it within the developers and the testers that you work with, and then start small, then work from there. Once the managers get to notice that, or if you're a manager yourself, share it amongst the managers. Get the managers to then share it with their direct leads, direct lines. It's about just generating an interest, generating that skill development, and for example, if there was a major security breach that took place recently, for example, the TalkTalk one, share the background information around that. Find out if you're vulnerable to the kinds of flaws that they were vulnerable to, and trying to generate interests in that way. That's probably where I would start, is look for sort of, start small, think big afterwards. Next question, Dara.
The next question I have here in front of me says, do we need security testing with free tools only? Or do we do security testing with free tools only?
No, there are a number of different types of tools that are out there. The one I mentioned, Z-Attack Proxy, is free, but there are a number of pretty good applications you have to pay for that I've used in the past. I've used Burp Suite, which is very good indeed. The license for that is around about £250–300 a year. I don't know in dollars or euros. I imagine it's about 300 euros. And Burp Suite again is an intercepting proxy. It has regular updates. It allows you to do a number of different types of attacks. Spidering, which is a very useful tool. It has a scanner. It has fuzzers built into it. There are a number of other different dynamic scanners that you can get, for example, Kinetics and Netsparker, and then there's various code checking tools as well, like Veracode and Checkmarks. So there are free tools and there are also paid for tools. You have to really take the time to investigate which ones are most suitable for your business, and if you have any money to invest in tools in your organizations. But if you don't, there are a great set of free tools available out there. One of the best available is Kali, which is a Linux distribution which has a lot of very powerful tools built into it. It would be too deep a topic for a half-hour, 45-minute webinar. It's more something you want to do in a day-long workshop, really.
All right, let's have a look at another question here. This attendee says, we accept security testing is very important and we are doing it in our organization. For our SAP-based application portfolio, we are currently doing security testing by just capturing roles, privileges, and organization-based access-related testing. But what more do we need for sophisticated security testing?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. So you're doing roles-based permissions and authentication authorization. So it's worth looking at how the user interface behaves. So what data can be input. For example, if you can generate error messages that expose information to the user, if it's a web-based application, I think you said it was SAP. I don't know whether that's a client-based application or whether it's web-based now. But if it's web-based, then there are simple things you can do, like observing headers and footers in the browser developer tools, or if it's a client-based application, so it's installed on a machine, then looking at the logging that's written back to the machine. So Windows and Mac both have log files which are written. When an application does something, look at the error messages that are contained within that to see if it's exposing information. Also looking at cryptography, how the data is encrypted and how passwords are stored and how secure those passwords are. Does your application have a good password security policy? Can it be brute forced? By that I mean, can you do you prevent multiple login attempts, or do you limit that to say sort of 3 or 5 attempts before it logs out? And when you do that, do you give out lots of information about the user so that a potential hacker could steal that data? So you can start from a number of different levels. Again, it's a bit of a minefield really, but most of my experience is in web applications, and I always start with what messages are being sent and received in the headers and footers before I go anywhere else at all. I don't even have to open a tool at all. I can just look at what the headers or footers are doing in the browser. That's often where I start.
The
Next one,
next
Dara.
the next question here, it's quite a long question, so I'll repeat it if you need me to.
Okay.
This person here says, we started to take security testing seriously this past year, and we are able to train several testers on black box security testing, mainly based on OWASP. But now, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, so apologies.
That's fine. No, wasp boy. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine.
We now want to change direction towards white box security tests, starting from a threat model in the context of a testing team within an engineering team. We couldn't find much training available in this context, and have you any recommendations?
Yes, I do. So you mentioned OWASP there. They have a lot of good information on threat modeling. The Stride threat model that I've used in the past is based on a Microsoft threat model. But then you can also start using things like the OWASP testing guide, which is a very good place to start building up security testing knowledge. And it has both black box and white box testing considerations in there. So I would look at the OWASP testing guide. That's a good place to start. Also, there's a document in the OWASP material called the Application Security Verification Standard, and that can give you it's not very prescribed like a lot of standards are, but it gives you a framework from what level of detail you need to go at to achieve security or a certain levels of security in your applications. So the ASVS and the OWASP testing guide are really good places to start to establish a security policy for your teams. I would go there first if you haven't done so already.
All right, I think you've kind of answered one of the other questions here there as well. Another attendee asked, is the OWASP Top 10 a good guideline for starting as a security tester?
Yeah, so yeah, I would agree with that. Just to embellish on that, OWASP Top 10 is something, the most recent one is in 2013 for web applications, and they've also got one for mobile applications as well. So it's worth considering both depending on what kind of applications you produce. The OWASP Top 10 is an excellent place to start for learning vulnerabilities, like SQL injection and cross-site scripting and things like that. But if you want to go in for a broader, deeper approach to building a security testing strategy, yeah, the testing guide and the ASVS are a good place to start, as is the OWASP Top 10.
How can we be sure that how can we be sure that free tools do not have security holes, and what regulations should they meet?
Well, from a regulation point of view, that's difficult for me to comment because, you know, a rule in one country is going to be different from another country. From the free tool point of view, a lot of hackers make their own tools to do security testing or hacking with, and there's no regulation around those. However, a lot of the tools in Kali are tried and tested by a lot of different people in the security business. The OSCP who produced Kali wouldn't put them on there if they hadn't felt that these weren't good tools that could be used by lots of people in order to make their applications more secure. I'm not sure there's a specific regulation around this. However, I mentioned Z-Attack Proxy. and that's made by a guy called Simon Bennett, who's full-time on that project, but he used to work at Mozilla, or may still do work at Mozilla, and it's basically an application that's crowdsourced. It's very, very ethically produced. It's frequently virus checked or having, significant testing done on it itself by the development team of that particular application. It's an application I've been using for 3 or so years now. I trust it. I don't see why others couldn't trust it, but if you work in a heavily regulated organization that has standing operating procedures and things like that, it might be worth investigating how these individual tools might work well for you before you start using them. You wouldn't start painting a wall without testing a small area of it first. So it's worth ensuring the tools are right for you and they're right in your context, in your business space. They work for me, they may not work for you, so it's worth investigating that first to ensure that you don't breach your company policies. It's difficult for me to apply a standard for those because there are, as far as I know, there aren't any standards for them, but you have to do what's right for your business, for your policies. And if the policies are wrong, maybe look at changing them. I hope that was helpful.
Is it enough to just use tools for security testing, or should QA add hacking as a skill set to perform good security tests?
I'd agree with that assumption. Tools are very helpful, but they can be quite limiting. Sometimes they produce a lot of false positives, so that is things that appear to be bugs but aren't. They may look like a problem, but it's just white noise really. You have to learn how to filter out what's important from what's not. So tools alongside exploratory security testing is a very helpful thing to do. Tools are very helpful. Automated checking is very helpful. It gives you broad coverage, but it doesn't. Sometimes tools miss things, and that's where the human needs to be able to drill down on these things. After all, hackers are very very clever people. They work and adapt very fast to changes in technology, faster than development organizations do. As soon as a new technology is available, someone's found a way to hack it. So it's important to remember that no matter how fast or how good our testing is, nothing's ever going to be 100% secure. So I would employ a wide range of different techniques to achieve what you need to achieve, rather than just relying on one tool and thinking that's going to solve all your problems.
Another person here is asking, what do you think about Netsparker tool? Is it good to use?
I've used it, I've trialed it, I found it to be effective, but it was only on that single instance that I've used it, and it was a very, I don't want to advertise, these companies do a lot of advertising themselves, but I found it to be quite effective. But it might not be as effective for you, so it's they have a trial version, I believe, and you can try it out. It might be limited functionality in the trial, but it's worth contacting them and getting an installation for you to try out. It also has a number of different reports in it, which might be more useful for people who only want to see the high-level information rather than drill down on the detail of a problem. I found it effective, though, in my context.
All right, and there's another quite interesting question here to get your viewpoint on it. This person is asking, sure, any tips on how to scare business decision makers and how much is enough?
Well, the one way you can scare them is actually by finding flaws and vulnerabilities in your application. The problem with that is if you don't have permission to do security testing, that can land you in a heap of trouble. However, if you've got, like I mentioned earlier, a place where you can test in isolation without harming anyone, for example on a virtual machine or on a containerized environment, or it's set up as a standalone locally hosted environment like developers do when they write code, then that might be a way that you can find flaws without damaging live production or test environments. It's worth doing that. The other thing that you might want to do is, if you find out that there's a flaw in a component that you use, for example, a development framework or a content management system or a JavaScript library that you might use in your business, and there's been a security vulnerability raised against that particular technology, it's worth including that in any reports that you might have to senior management and going, hey, we might want to update this because, you know, there's some security flaws with this particular version. And then it might prompt some interest in actually checking that your technologies are secure. So that's not necessarily scaring, but just doing good due diligence over your technologies in your businesses. It's important to keep things up to date. I hope that was helpful. I don't want to scare anyone, but it's important to recognise what you are and aren't capable of doing within the bounds and the rules of your business.
Yeah, I think a good thing to add there is if you get in trouble, just say Dan Billing told you to do this.
No, no, don't do that.
We'll share his contact details at the end. All
Yeah.
right, and we'll take one more question, Dan. We'll take one more question before we wrap up here. This person here, because we're almost out of time, so this person is asking, have you any tips on how to create or start a checklist for back-end security testing?
Yes, I do. I have a mind map of security heuristics, and I'd be willing to share that. I've actually shared it via Twitter already. It's on my GitHub page, and I will share it via Twitter again via the test.org and Eurostar Twitter feeds when I have a chance later on today, if that's okay. And it has a lot of stuff in there which might be useful to you. Does that sound all right, Dara?
That sounds great. Yeah, we'll share that later on today. And I think
if that person's not on Twitter, tell them to get in touch with me via yourselves, and I'll see if I can email it to them.
All right. Yeah, I'll be sending you all out a follow-up email shortly after this webinar. It'll provide a link to where you can view this webinar. But if you want to respond to me, I can get that mind map across to you as well. So, all right, I think that's it for us here today. We've just run a little bit over time. So I want to thank Dan for taking the time out today to talk to you all about security testing. And I'd like to thank all of you attendees for coming along and for all of your questions. And this is the last webinar we're going to be hosting in 2016. So we're looking forward to getting started with 2017 and working on a whole host of webinars for you to enjoy. I believe there was around 33, 34 webinars run by us in the last year, and you can check them all out over on Test Huddle. So that's it for now, and have a great holiday season, and we will catch up with you all in the new year.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Dara. How did that go?